test using my cell phone, but going live. I didn't want to do it this way. It's just my normal program is not working. So, yep, this is on my cell phone and going live. So if you see this, leave a comment to make sure that it's working. So I do actually want to talk about a video I watched recently from a subscriber of mine who's got his own channel. Let's see if I can say his name right. Parisia. And he's made two videos recently about, not reviewing, but talking about this book, The Case Against Public Education. Actually, no, just The Case Against Education, Why the Education System is a Waste of Time and Money by Brian Kaplan. So I haven't read this book, but I have it, and I watched Kaplan give a lecture on it in DC two winters ago. Yeah, okay, yeah, ending public schools. Yeah, it's working. Hey, Luke. So in that video, his most recent one, he talked about how what we have with public schools, the way people defend them and talk about them, they speak of them as if they're some kind of human capital project. You're a child, you don't have any skills, you don't have any social abilities, and you get sent to public schools and they imbue you with all this knowledge, which raises your human capital. Now, there's lots of problems with that theory. What are they teaching you? How valuable is that in terms of human capital? We could just assume that everything they teach is good and contributes to human capital, and I think that's very unlikely. Um, there are subjects that are interesting and do contribute to human capital, but how many of them are the schools teaching? And then the other thing is, like, how well do they teach it? It's a very open question. I mean, there's a lot of people who go to public schools and they come away, even if you want to say the curriculum is good, they don't necessarily know anything at the end. And this is very common with testing. They've done studies, and I'm probably going to remember this wrong, and it depends on the study, but it's something like 85% of the stuff you learn, you forget within 2 weeks after the test. And this is true with any knowledge generally. If you don't use it in a day-to-day basis, most people are going to not retain very much of it. They're going to lose most of it. So even if what they were presenting was something that increased your human capital, it's something that most people lose, almost immediately. They don't use it in college. They don't use it in their daily lives for the most part, for the overwhelming majority of the time. So what Kaplan lays forward is the idea that it's really sort of virtue signaling. They're showing, hey, I'm conformist. I'll do what society wants. I'll go through the motions that society demands of me, and it's basically like getting a gold star. It's not saying that you know anything. It's not saying anything that you're smart or that you're competent, but that you went through the process that the government is demanding, that society is demanding, and here's your certificate saying that you've done this, and that this has some kind of social value. That um, employers, colleges, just people in society generally can look at that and say, okay, you went through the motions. You are a whatever. You have at least a marginal amount of buy-in to our society, and so they reward you. Now, that latter type is not the type that people talk about. People don't defend the public schools along those lines, but that does appear to be what they're doing. And Kaplan gives the ratio as about 80% virtue signaling and about 20%, capital. And it's not like every person gets that amount. There's certain fields and certain kinds of study, and this is including everything, including college. So they're like, say, doctors, when they go to college and they learn about biology and the various techniques, they're getting human capital, although they also forget a lot of what they're doing. And a lot of what they learn in school and college is not stuff that they use, that does not contribute to their human capital. And there are other examples, but most people get very little or none. And I think that one of the things that's very interesting with this coronavirus, I've been a critic of public schools for many years. I've been heavily influenced by the writings of John Taylor Gatto, um, who I believe passed away maybe a year or two ago. And for those of you who don't know, Gatto was a public school teacher in New York City. He won Teacher of the Year for the city twice and Teacher of the State once. He retired in the early 90s, I want to say like 91 or 92. And then he wrote a series of books that were critical of public schools to the point of saying that they exist to crush learning, to crush ingenuity, to crush the free spirit of children, and that the best way to reform them is to abolish them completely, or at the very least to make them non-mandatory. He thinks that if they just took away the compulsory laws, that within 5 years they would mostly be gone because people would just stop going. They would find other alternatives. But never in his wildest dreams or my wildest dreams did anyone imagine that, at the start of 2020, essentially every public school in the country, and of course every private school as well, would be empty. And thanks to COVID-19, this has actually happened. We have a situation now where some 20 million teenagers are basically not in school. Now, it's true, many of them are taking online classes and they still have some commitments that they have to do, but their loads have been greatly, greatly reduced. And I think that this is going to draw a lot of people's attentions to the idea that what the public schools are doing is more of the latter, more of the social virtue signaling and the social signaling, maybe not necessarily virtue signaling, but social signaling versus skills. And, we've seen this, right away when this happened. A lot of schools announced that instead of giving grades, that they were just going to give a pass-fail. So I had friends who were going to Ivy League schools who were just told this is now pass-fail. They can't grade it in a way that would be fair because of the disruption, because of the logistics, and so they're going to get pass-fails. Yes, Parisia, I did, and this is a video response to that. I tried to put a link in to your video in mine, but it didn't work because I had to go live instead of record a video. But I did. This is basically a response to that. And if you saw the beginning, I talked about that, so you are acknowledged. We have, no problems. Thanks. Yep, no problem. Thanks for the videos. They're good videos. Why are we paying for all these buildings, the facilities, the administrators, the teachers, their salaries, when we can basically do the same thing online at whatever 1/100th or 1/10th the cost? We're going to have, many people are going to allege that this year students are going to get a much worse education because they're not in school, but because they're doing stuff online. The proponents of public schools would dismiss things like Khan Academy or online learning or online universities as totally subpar, and yet that's what everybody has right now. That's what everyone's going to have for the rest of this year. Who knows? Maybe even part of next year. And yeah. Okay. One thing I will say about the comments, they pop up when they pop up, but then they don't stay. So I can't see them later. So I might not be, if I don't reply right away, I can't be really quick on it, and I do apologize for that because I do want to reply to comments. I don't think that in a year, 2 years, 3 years, I don't think there's going to be any evidence that shows that this actually hurt anybody. Localities are finally going to start looking at the public schools as scams. There's not going to be any. I think what's going to happen is there's not going to be any measurable, legitimate ill effect as a result of none of these kids going to school. And I think people are going to realize what the hell are we paying for, and these are enormously expensive in terms of infrastructure, in terms of salaries, in terms of benefits. But it's even more than that because there's the whole opportunity cost of just taking the kids, the teenagers, and the younger kids as well, the actual children, and forcing them to spend 8 hours a day, 9 hours a day in these institutions when all the work could be aggregated into an hour and a half, 2 hours for most of them. This is how, when I was in school, you could be in class, you could do all your work in 10 minutes, and then you were just goofing off for the rest of the class. Or it was a class that you knew well enough that you knew you would pass every test without ever studying, but you had to go. You had to get your attendance, and you had to sit in the class with a whole bunch of other students who they didn't maybe know the material as well, but they didn't want to be there. They didn't want to learn it. They still don't remember it, or they didn't remember it a week later. So why are we paying for it like it's this, like existential part of our national defense, something that we can't do without? Actually, I'm going to see, let me go here, This might be good. This might be a good cheat. Ah, here we go. Ironically, the largest public school system in the country was ground zero for the pandemic, New York. Yeah. Okay. This might actually. Oh, awesome. Okay, now I can see your comments in real time. Hopefully, um, that is awesome. Perfect. Perfect. Okay, so that makes me feel a lot better now. I can watch people. Um, Schools, aka public indoctrination camps, are a waste of time, especially when you hit your teens. By the time you're 13, you want out to work and get an apprenticeship. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. You should go and do whatever. Now, there are some people who would want to continue some type of formal education, but I think it's a small minority. And they would go to academies that focus on whatever it is they're into. Maybe they want to learn the classics. Maybe they want to go into a career path towards being a doctor or a physicist or whatever else. But most people won't do that. Most people won't need to do that. Um, so, like, it, he's got a Mario Doctor of Red Pills. So I think that what this is going to do, I think a lot of kids are realizing this. I think a lot of I hate using that term kids. The author of Teen 210 would hate me for saying kids. But especially teenagers, they understand that they're basically just in a time place. And, I understood this as well. When I was a senior, I was a smart kid and I mostly got good grades. But by the time I got to high school, I was at that age where I realized that I wasn't interested in everything and I didn't have to get good grades and I wasn't going to work hard. So I never studied. I never did homework. And that meant that especially by the time I was taking things like calculus and physics, that I wasn't always doing the best, and I actually got some really bad grades my senior year. I basically flunked calculus, I flunked French, I flunked physics. I almost flunked shop because the teacher caught me skipping class. um, so now with him I was able to ingratiate myself with him and become friends with him. Teens are adults with children privileges, yeah, but without adult rights. All right, that's the problem, is they're not enfranchised. But so you'd think, well, all these things they're teaching you, calculus, physics, French, these are all really important things and it really should matter whether I learn them or not. Well, I never used them again. And I should have failed all those classes. My physics and calculus teacher, I don't know what, he just passed me, but he should have failed me. But I think they understand, the teachers understand this would just ruin somebody's life for no reason. Who cares if you know calculus or physics? And my French teacher, it was more explicit. She asked me, do you need to pass this class to graduate? I said that I did. And she goes, okay, you pass. And she gave me like a C. And I should have completely failed that class. And so, and this is at a blue ribbon, a good public school, that's not all grungy and whatever. 99% white for the race realists out there. And yet I think it was understood implicitly and explicitly that it really didn't matter. It was a rubber stamp, and they weren't going to not rubber stamp somebody because they got senioritis or because they failed one test or they took one class that they shouldn't have taken or whatever. And I think they also understand who's going to use those classes. Very few people did. Even the people who got good grades, who got 4.0 in advanced calculus, most of those people never used calculus again. They don't use it today. Very, very few people of those people ever did. And so I think a lot of people understand this. Now, there's a lot of propaganda in place about how valuable they are and how important schools are and how your life depends on it and you'll be a bomb and all this stuff. And this propaganda is effective on young adults, on kids and young adults, and many of them internalize that and do believe it. But I think that some of them realize that's not true, and this is going to red pill. It's going to red pill a lot of people. Now, is every single person who's at home right now not going to school going to become an anarcho-capitalist or a John Taylor Gatto fanatic? Probably not. But many of them are going to realize, wow, I have so much, even in a quarantine where they're maybe nominally not supposed to go outside or whatever, they have more freedom now than they ever had when they were in school. And yet they can still do the material such as it is. And you might say, well, they're not learning it as well, but that begs the question, do they even need to know it well? Does the material even matter? And the most honest answer is no, it doesn't matter. The stuff, the curriculum, even even curriculum, like I have, everyone's got their own interests, and I certainly have topics that I really care about. Everyone knows I'm a history buff, and I read a ton of books on history, and I love history, and I think it's really interesting. But at the end of the day, I totally recognize that you don't need to know it for most things. If you want to have a nuanced view of the world or whatever, sure, it's great, but you don't need it. And somebody who, if I was a teacher, and I had a history class, and one of my students said, I don't care about this. I don't need it. They're right. They don't. And they would say, I would rather do whatever it is they would rather do would almost be better other than stay in public school. That would be the one thing that they shouldn't do. So, uh, we're going to see that just logistically, this stuff could have been done on the cheap. Now, I would argue we don't even need the online classes. Just let everybody go after middle school, or after sixth or seventh grade. Just be like, you know what, you're on your own. Do what you want, and uh, we can close. We can sell the buildings off. We can close them, and we can save the taxpayers a lot of money. And the thing is, these are not tiny sums. When my little town built its high school in 1999, the bond issue they passed basically amounted to something from between $500 and $1,200 per year per household in the town, for I think it was like 20 years. So that's a huge investment of time for something that, I mean, you can see the building, it's there, so it looks nice, but it didn't raise the IQ of one student. It didn't raise the achievement of one student. It was just a nice, if you like the aesthetics, which I grew up in them, so I do like the aesthetics. But come on, $1,200 a week, a year per household, that, or 500 to 1,200. That's ridiculous. People are disillusioned with how long information stays in memory. Uh, People are delusional about how long information stays in the memory. All those French classes really are for nothing. Other cultures had education more based on memorization stuff for life. Yeah, it really is. There's so much wrong with the assumptions of a uniform curriculum here. We could debate. I mean, people get into debates about should we teach, African studies or women's studies, trans studies. One of my friends in England told me that his 5-year-old son came back and he said, "Daddy, did you know that a boy can be a girl?" So at some point, the kindergartners needed to learn about trans studies, okay? And that's not even to take away that maybe trans people should be studied and they're interesting and whatever. And fuck, I've hooked up with trans people, so like more power to them. Is that curriculum? But that's even, it's not even that. I mean, even just reading, writing, and arithmetic. Well, how much and what kind and to what extent and how much, like, doing math. Math is wonderful, don't get me wrong. Math is really important. We need to have people in our society who know it. We need to have some people who know, some basic stuff, and we need a really small minority of people who know a ton of stuff. And then there's other people who don't need to know but find it an interesting exercise and interesting, mentally stimulating, who would probably learn it as well. And beyond that, it's like, who gives a fuck? Why are we spending every 40 minutes a day every day from the time you're 7 until you turn 18? Like, that's an enormous investment. And again, they don't remember any of it. They forget everything. Everyone knows that they forget everything. So why are we paying the pensions? Why are we paying for the janitorial staff? Why are we paying for the administrators? It's just all complete. Like, it's a huge, and it's not just. I mean, the taxes are a huge amount of money. The resources that are bid into the schools is a huge amount of money. But I think the biggest one is the opportunity costs of the quote kids, who, instead of getting into the job market, instead of pursuing what they're really interested in, so like I was really into music. I was a clarinet player. That's what I cared about the most. And I would have, if I had had my druthers, I would have practiced clarinet 4 or 5 hours a day for probably 5 or 6 years in that period, and I would have become a much better player than I ever became. But instead, I had to go to shop class, I had to go to health class, I had to go to geography class, classes that I knew all the material, but I still had to take the class. And that's just me, and that's just my personal thing. But everybody's got that. So, uh, what do you think of the Finnish school system? Supposedly they are the best in the world. So I don't know any of the specifics, other than you can devise a metric and a rubric to assess anything and claim that anything is the best. All right. So this happens very common with healthcare, where if you just say, well, anything that's universal at the point of pay or free at the point of pay is automatically better than a system that doesn't do that, even if a system that you have to pay for has a, way better survival rate and way better higher quality and whatever. So you can put a metric in there that can arrive at any question. Now, do I think that the education system in Finland is like the healthcare system in Cuba? Probably not, but I doubt that it's that wonderful. But I don't know any of the particulars. uh, I hear they're having trouble finishing school. Law, funny, Luke. James C. Scott has interesting theories on the effect of writing and education on states versus stateless societies. The art of not being together. So that's the book about Zomia, which I don't have that book. I've read about it, but he talks a little bit about it in the Against the Grain book. And basically, if you don't have literacy, you kind of can't have a state, because you can't record taxes and you can't keep track of all that stuff. So you almost need to have at least a class of scribes that are able to record that kind of stuff. Now, I'm not calling for illiteracy, but it seems like that's one of the prerequisites. The other things are you have to have some kind of taxable staple. So like things like potatoes or dates are not really the best. You need some kind of crop that you can be easily assessed and easily counted and easily confiscated. We all have compulsory French in Canada. The only thing people retain is the ability to read a menu in French. Yeah, this again, and I'm not. It's not even to say that learning French is bad. I would like to learn French. That would be kind of cool. I think not being monolingual is a good. I learn a lot about English when I've learned other languages, and it's really fun, and it has a lot of value to it if you value it. But again, the value is subjective. It's not objective, and so now there is something to be said there, Stephen. Languages can be interesting, and there are things. Again, I'm not a nationalist, I'm not a statist, but you can, and this kind of goes to the idea of social virtue signaling or social capital. You can give everyone a combined experience. Now, it doesn't really work with French, but this is something that's really interesting that my friends from New Zealand have explained to me. In New Zealand, of course, New Zealand is it's a part of the Anglosphere. They speak English. Australia and New Zealand are like appendages. They're part of the British Commonwealth, right? And they, other than Lord of the Rings, they don't, and the Anzac Corps in World War I and World War II, they don't have a lot of national unity or commonality. They're just like Australia, basically. So what they started doing is teaching Maori. Now, Maori is a language that there's different versions of Maori and stuff in New Zealand, but Maori is not something that an American would learn or an Australian would learn or someone in the UK would learn. And at first, they were just kind of offering these as basic classes, but now they're becoming um, basically immersive and mandatory. And what you end up happening is now younger Kiwis, guys who are 20 and under, are probably going to speak Maori to some extent, and it's working its way into the culture in a way that now they will have an independent New Zealand identity that they did not have before by virtue of the language they're speaking. And I've seen similar things have happened in the UK in places like the Isle of Man. So the Isle of Man started immersion of their Celtic language, which is called Manx, Manx. And because all the students there were learning Manx and their parents do not speak Manx, Manx became an extinct language as a spoken language in the 70s. The last native speaker died then, but they had it all written down, so they know how to teach it. And so there's that can happen. That's something, and you can always weld some kind of, hey, we've got some unity thing. Now, if they teach French, it doesn't really work because they speak French everywhere, and Canadians aren't going to identify with people in Mali or Senegal, Gabon, or Polynesia, Tahiti, or whatever. But so if they had picked like Algonquin or something, it probably would have worked better. Oh my goodness, look at all these. Taxation is theft, very much. Could have happened to a nicer bunch of folks. Goodbye, college. I played clarinet. Yep, I played clarinet. I got a scholarship to play it at Michigan State, and I practiced it. But I could have practiced in college. High school, I practiced an hour a day, but I could have easily done 4 or 5 hours if I wasn't in school, and I would have become that much better. I've learned more about computers by playing around with Linux the man pages than I have through college. Meanwhile, public schools reduce all computer classes to Microsoft Office tutorials. To be fair, I did learn to type in seventh grade, I want to say. So that probably falls into one of the skills that I've retained because I do use it. But I'm sure there's online tutorials that will teach you how to do that as well. That probably is the most useful skill that I definitely learned in school. I mean, obviously being able to read, but I don't think I learned to. I don't remember for sure. I'm not sure that I learned to read in school though. But I guarantee though my parents would not have allowed me to be illiterate, whether or not I went to school. Um, so the Brehon losses in medieval Ireland, pre-state conquest by Stuarts. You're expected to memorize every legal decision for like 2,000 years before you could become a judge. Wow. Hard to imagine a lawyer being smart enough to do that these days. I'm sure some of them are. I'm sure some lawyers are. Interesting thoughts on languages, my guy. Yeah, I think because languages affect how you think, they can affect you in a more deep way. And if you are using them, you will retain them. That's another big thing. So if they just taught it and nobody learned it, you wouldn't remember it. But if they make everybody learn it and it becomes part of everyone's daily thing, and for younger kids, it becomes a distinguishing thing so they can talk. So if you listen to the kids on the Isle of Man, they would say stuff like, I like speaking Manx because I can talk to my friends or my siblings, and my parents who over here do not know what we're talking about. So you could be on the phone and be like, hey, I want to come over and suck your dick. Let's have an orgy. And then go to and your parents are listening on the phone, and you could say, yeah, we're just going to go study. And they wouldn't know. And just having that kind of inside scoop. And also, one of my friends in New Zealand was telling me that he's a little bit older, and so he learned some Maori but isn't fluent in it, whereas his younger siblings are fluent in it. But he said that there are words in Maori that aren't in English, so Kiwis are now going to have these linguistic concepts that other English speakers will not have, and that will give them a distinguishing characteristic. And the other thing, and again, I'm not an advocate of the draft here, but like if we're just talking about your rubber stamp, we could just do a 9 week, just do the draft or whatever for 9 weeks and say, okay, you're 14, you're 15, you have to put in your whatever, your National Guard training, and that will be the uniting thing that everyone has, rather than 12 years every day not learning anything, or at least teach them like how to shoot. That would be another. I would be in favor of public schools if they just required you to learn how to shoot. That would be wonderful. They raise the smoking age to 21. I think it's BS. Yes, I know smoking is bad, but it's not about smoking. It's the principle. Yeah, and that went without a flush. And now they're talking about paying, the Democrats want to pay everyone who's 16. So it's like, okay. And this gets into the whether 16-year-olds should vote. It's like, okay, if they're adults, then they should be legally emancipated. They shouldn't have to go to school. They should be able to sign contracts. They should be able to work as much as they want. They should be able to get married. They should be able to agree to have medical procedures done or cosmetic surgeries or whatever, or and vote and own property and fire and have sex and all that stuff. Or they're children and they can't do any of those things. And we're kind of having this fuck all where they're like they can't make up their minds. But the issue is that they're either autonomous or they're not. And I mean, people know I definitely fall in the period that autonomy probably starts in the early teens, 13, 14 for most people. Some people know, but some people never become autonomous, right? Some people are 35 and they shouldn't be allowed to vote and they shouldn't have legal authority over their lives. And also, the nuance here is that everybody is different and it should be based ideally on some demonstration of competence. But as a rule of thumb, I mean, what really should happen is the age of consent should be somewhere like, and I don't mean for sex, I mean for like legal empowerment should be around the time of a bar mitzvah, which would be 13, 14. But I learned to type by entering in cheats as fast as possible in Warcraft 2. Hey, whatever it takes. I learned much of my English vocabulary. Wait, DC Pagan, where are you from? What's your normal language, first language? Drinking age should be 14 and loosely enforced. I agree with that as a non-drinker. So these are things that A, people would continue to use, and B, would not take that long to teach, right? It doesn't require many years. And you would still have the gold star, the, hey, you conformed, you, whatever, put in your service, in the military. This is something that armies can do this as well. Places that have drafts, that have militaries. The United States has never really had this for a very long period, thankfully. But if you have a society where everyone's been to the military, then that's some shared experience. So I think the best example of this today, in a good and a bad way, would be Israel. Everyone's got to be in the IDF for the most part. Everyone has that as a shared experience, and that is your. They have school there, obviously too. But if you did your time, then it's like, okay, you did your time, so you're like a legit person. It's a gold star. It doesn't mean that you're competent. It doesn't mean that you're a badass. It doesn't always mean that you're a war criminal either. But that's one system. Again, I almost anything would be better than 12 years. Ayn Rand thoughts. Who's Ayn Rand? Never heard of her. Him. Sorry. Uh, Sorry, I'm thirsty. This is hard. This is a hard work YouTubing. I'm Hispanic, but most comfortable with English. I'm also teaching myself Japanese, Latin, Sanskrit. I learn languages from access to media and literature, not necessarily from money. Yeah, it's interesting. I actually have a good friend, libertarian ANCAP, who, when I met him, he was 18, and he was a hyper polyglot. He claimed he could speak 25 languages. As far as I could tell, he could. I tested him on Icelandic, and it was better than mine. And I've seen him speak Korean randomly. We were hiking, and we met some Koreans on top of Mount Monadnock by Keene, and he could speak with them. And so, unless he just randomly happened to be able to speak, I've seen him speak Spanish as well. So I asked him how he did it, and he actually did it by watching Game of Thrones. He watched every season of Game of Thrones in the various languages. So he'd watch it in Spanish, he'd watch it in French, he'd watch it in whatever language he could find it in. It wasn't dubbed that often, but he could watch it at the very least with subtitles. And that was kind of like his in for each language. Uh, he also took a lot of modafinil, so that might be part of it as well. And he learned to code too. Like, he never went to college. He learned to code on his own and got a good job doing that. So, but again, I think it's interesting because when people talk about public schools, they kind of imagine that it's a jobs program, or that it's building up your human capital in some other kind of vague sense. And that used to be, you learn the classics. You learn to speak and write in Greek and Latin, and you learn to recite the speeches of Aristophanes, or Xenophon, or Aristotle, or Plato, and all that stuff is super interesting and valuable, but not necessarily valuable to everybody. So I wouldn't assume that that's a universal curriculum. And now it's like you can barely speak English. Modafinil is a nootropic. So a lot of programmers, a lot of people in like Silicon Valley, in fact, it's apparently it's horribly abused there, but it's supposed to make you more able to focus and concentrate. And he was pretty much on it all the time, as far as I could tell. He seemed like a nice guy, and I don't know. He said there was no downside, but I don't know. But he took it for that. Are you drinking Pepsi? It's Pepsi Zero, so shut up. It's got plenty of it's. I don't think this has aspartame in it. That's good. It's fine. Yeah, liberals think we love Ayn Rand. Few libertarians care about her after they become libertarians. Yeah, this is one of those things. It's very rare when people go to debate libertarians. It's very rare that they know what they're talking about. They've heard of Ayn Rand. They've maybe heard of Milton Friedman and F.A. Hayek. they usually don't have a lot of bad things to say about either of them for some whatever reason. But they really, really hate Ayn Rand, and Ayn Rand is brilliant, and they should love her. She's a woman, and she's an immigrant, and she she excelled before the age of affirmative action. She excelled in a man's world. She defeated the men. She was sexually liberated. Dude, she should be the pinup girl of feminists everywhere and of the left everywhere. And the fact that like Atlas Shrugged has not been remade 100 times or 5 times by major studios is, well, that's either an indication of the strict copyright enforcement of Leonard Peikoff and the Ayn Rand Institute, or of their ideological distaste for her. But no, I think most of her followers are not there. The people who stay followers of her identify as objectivists, not as libertarians, and most of them hate libertarians, and there's very little love lost between them. If you look at the other thinkers, if you Doherty names the five, the so-called radicals for capitalism: Mises, Hayek, Friedman, Rothbard, Rand. Four of them, the four men, even though they disagreed and were very different in lots of ways, four of them, three of them Jewish, three of them immigrants. You can kind of see them they had different philosophies or whatever. You can kind of read them all. They kind of fit together. They can talk to each other. Ayn Rand is kind of the outlier there in almost every way, which is not to deny her brilliance or her, many of the contributions she's made, but she has this outsized place in people's perception of libertarians. And whenever, I mean, I've only read a few of her books. I tried to read Atlas Shrugged and I couldn't do it. Uh, Most Hispanics I know slur their speech and do not properly conjugate or use the subjunctive mood like most English speakers, so I mistrust street talking for learning. I learn languages by the book. But languages aren't in the book, languages are spoken. DC Pagan. I only know Ayn Rand from Bioshock. Who's better than Ayn Rand? No one. No one is better than Ayn Rand. Where can adults get training similar to Boy Scouts? Well, so there's like a whole industry of ex-Navy SEALs who do teaching like that, who will teach you to do that kind of stuff. But you can buy the Boy Scout handbook, and they're actually kind of classic because they do teach you a lot of stuff: how to build a fire, how to do various knots, and even if you don't learn everything that way, it does kind of teach you what you need to know. And one thing I'll say is like I learned so much more in Boy Scouts than I learned in school because it was so much less supervised. We did have scout leaders, but they were kind of hands off and let us just be kids together, grow up together, and we learned a lot more. We had much more wide ranging discussions. We had much more substantive experiences. Never mind the communal showering, that was part of it, but like just the fact that we'd have to spend days together camping, hiking, packing, unpacking, staying warm, staying cool in rough environments, relatively speaking. That was all really valuable. Just even learning how to pack. I mean, I'm just amazed by people who don't know how to pack for a weekend, and how to pitch a tent, how to make a fire, how to cook. These were all things that were useful and I thought were really rewarding. And we were kind of not supervised that much. They just said, "Here, go for it, and if you need help, you can ask for help." But they really wanted us to do everything, and we did. And obviously, we spent a lot of the time playing, which is really important. If you listen to Jonathan Haidt, you should be playing. That's how you learn social skills, social cues, how to get along, how to move in the hierarchy, all that kind of stuff. We would play capture the flag for 8 hours at a time, where you learned things like stalking and how to move through the woods. I was actually gonna mention this when I reviewed About Face, David Hackworth's book, which is a really good book. He was a 25-year veteran of the military, and he joined the army when he was 15, and he said the best soldiers came from like Tennessee, Kentucky, and like the hill country of Virginia. He called them backcountry boys, and he said that these country boys, by the time that they were 10, were better than 99% of ever soldiers ever, right? So somebody who someone who's from Boston or New York City who joins the military and trains and trains and trains, he will never be as good a soldier as the Tennessee kid who grew up running around the woods, hunting and fishing and whatever. And whenever he found people in surrounding units who had that background, he would try and bring them into his command because he thought that they were the best. And it really says a lot about you can't. It's very hard to make up for that time lost. And the thing is, these kids weren't being stuck in school all the time. They were learning much more outside of school. So, but if you want to learn Boy Scouts, I would just buy the Boy Scout handbook and go from there. Yeah, I think in Toib's Sugar Book points out that the carcinogenic studies of artificial sweeteners is use something like 200 times normal dose to cause cancer. Um, yeah, only downside is changing the gut biome. That's what I've read, and also possibly the fact that you are getting a sweet taste makes you more likely to binge on something else, so a pizza or whatever. So that's fair, but the idea that it causes cancer, I think, is very unlikely. Didn't Ayn Rand hate homosexuals and call them disgusting? She maybe, I'm not sure. It wouldn't surprise me. But everyone hates homosexuals, so she basically said, "I also find it yucky, but it should be legal." Yeah, it sounds like something she would say. So, kind of guys, we're totally off topic here. So, I think that many people on the margins who some people are graduating, but everyone else is going to wonder why the hell are we every time why are we spending all this time in school when we could do this at home or just not at all? Why are we wasting time trying to get good grades when we can just get a pass fail on everything without putting out any effort? And that's largely happening too. A lot of these people are just going to get um, passed without knowing anything, and it's not going to actually have any detrimental effect. Every time you go onto Grindr, it makes you hate them even more. Well, that doesn't happen to me. I don't hate them more every time I go onto Grindr. You just have to adjust your expectations. Like I said, I have a friend I was talking to who's in high school, and I said, "How are online classes going?" He goes, "I was riding dick all morning." So like, that's what he's doing, and he's happy about that. My school is only counting work from now on as extra credit. There are no penalties for doing work. There's no penalties for doing work, but then there's no reason to do it either. What kind of school are you going to, if I ask? I remember someone telling me that the value of school is to get tougher from bullying and teenage drama. Only they don't allow that anymore. They don't allow bullying. They don't allow teenage drama. Um, the ever since homeschooling has been kind of slowly growing since the 1960s, and originally it was leftist. It was these left wing and unschooling kids. What's the term? There's a book. Compulsory Education and the Community of Scholars was an early book that kind of advocated it. It's a good book, and these are kind of like, hey man, don't tell my kids what to do, be free, whatever. That was their kind of attitude. And then later it got picked up by a lot of evangelicals, and it's mostly evangelicals now, but there's lots of secular people who do it as well. And public schools have always hated homeschool, and so they've always tried to level this charge that it's just academically inferior because your parents, unless your parents are highly qualified, and usually they're not, although sometimes they are, they're not going to be as expert as our public school teachers. And first of all, public school teachers are not necessarily experts. There are some who do know a lot about what they're talking about. Maybe they're really interested in a topic and they're widely read on it and they're passionate about it. And if you ask me to recall any teachers like that, I could. My memory would go to a couple who stand out in my mind as being good pedagogues who really understood their stuff. but my memory glosses over all the ones who really didn't. And you have a lot of them who didn't give a shit about what they taught. There are a lot of them who were teaching classes that had nothing to do with what their original majors were. That they were just punching time and getting a pension. And even if they did know what they were talking about, they didn't give a shit. So the fact that they might marginally have more qualifications, and that to some extent this becomes circular reasoning. You couldn't teach as well as a public school teacher because you don't have the qualifications. Why are they better teachers than you? Because they have the qualifications. Okay, let's get over that for a minute. But they've done study after study, and basically there's no studies that show that it's worse. Most of the studies show that it's better. And there's no evidence that they perform more poorly in college, or that they end up to be told fuck ups or don't have good jobs or whatever. So it seems like academically it's fine. And I mean, I knew kids who were homeschooled, and there were homeschool kids in my Boy Scout troop, and they weren't just Luddite idiots who didn't know anything. And the other thing is, everyone forgets everything anyway. So let's say that your homeschool parents don't know algebra, and they don't teach it to you very well, so you never learn algebra. Guess what? You could have had a fucking PhD math student be your algebra teacher, and you learned it really good. And then after the final test, you forgot all of it anyway. So by the second week of June, you're in the same place as the homeschool kid, even if you learned it and they didn't. Which again, the evidence is that they haven't. So because of the lack of evidence that academically homeschooling was inferior, there's been a shift to allege that it's not social, that it's somehow not training kids socially. And to that, I would say, again, you have no evidence for that. How would you even measure it? And the other thing is that public schools are a very unusual, atypical, socially aberrant atmosphere. Well, you have everyone's divided by age cohort, where you have these older people, twice or three times the age of most of the other people, who have, some kind of vast arbitrary authority over them. They can't leave. They can't decide what they want to do when they want to do it. They can't work. They have no rights. They're basically prisoners. They're very close to prisoners. The closest analogy to being in public school is being in prison. And that's the reality, and that's not a very social setting. There should be a mix of people. People should be able to associate voluntary. People should be in voluntary associations. When you're at work, you're there with people who agreed to be there. When I'm on an oil rig, everyone there is somebody who agreed to be there. And the people who didn't want to be on an oil rig because they didn't like the life or whatever it was, they're not there. So, or if you join a club, or when I'm in jujitsu, it's the same thing. Everyone who's at jujitsu, they want to be at jujitsu, and that's how we interact with each other, and that gives us a basis and a commonality and a thread, a unified thread through which that we can associate and connect, and that's just not there in a public school setting. I love my hand gestures, but okay, so, and I'm not advocating bullying here, but it doesn't even happen anymore. Pretty much all the public and private schools are counting the work up until early March before the shutdown. They're gonna have to, because a lot of kids are not gonna be able to just do the online stuff, or they'll plausibly deny and say that they can't. So even if they could, they say, "Oh, I don't have internet. Sorry." What are they gonna go check? No. I go to public school in Tennessee. What grade are you in? You in high school, middle school? School ruined me forever. My self esteem is permanently damaged. How did school ruin you? IAW 94. How did it ruin your self esteem? That's probably the main reason why public schools exist. People with self esteem are bad subjects. I don't know if that's the number one reason, D. Berkovic, but that's definitely part of it. The government does not spend billions of dollars and pass laws to make it compulsory out of charity. They're not doing that because they really want you to learn algebra. It's kind of silly to think that that would be the reason. Because if that is, then they're failing at doing that. They're not really learning algebra, and they think they don't care if you learn algebra or not. At no point will they say, you know what, we've done a study and nobody remembers this stuff, so we're abolishing public schools. No, they want to force you there. They want to control you. They want to have a mechanism by which they can at least try, however imperfectly, to shape how you develop mentally. And they do. Now, I don't think that the science is such that they can control exactly what's going to happen. They cannot stamp out exactly what they want. They would. I'm sure they would love to create automatons, P.F. Skinner, wise, as much as they could. They just don't have the resources or the knowledge to do that in a systematic way at this point. This may change at some point, by the way, but it's not the case now. But it's still enormously damaging. and it can give them a lot of sway over uh, controlling the zeitgeist. What do people know? What are people allowed to think? They can basically, people talk about the 3x5 card. Tom Woods talks about the 3x5 card of public opinion. The public schools are the ones who are basically framing that to a large extent. So it sounds more like the social situation in prison. Yeah, Greg, I agree with that. That's basically what it is. Uh, Only from prison you can get early release, and you have lawyers that can try and get you out of it, and that you can't really do that for public schools. Schools create obedient future workers for the laws, and corporations also creates class divisions. All that's true. And that's another thing that people are, this is what's so ironic is people talk about, well, you have to have public schools because if you didn't, then the poor people wouldn't go to school, and there would just be a rich upper class that's all educated, and the poor people won't be educated, and the rich upper class will run everything. Like, yeah, motherfucker. Have you ever heard of Harvard? Have you ever heard of Groton? Have you ever heard of St. Paul's School? The Ivy League. We have that now. Like, and Barack Obama does not send his kid to public school. None of them do. Elizabeth Warren doesn't send her kid to public school. They send them to private schools or elite private schools, and then they send them to Ivy League schools. That's what they do, and they have different curriculum there. They teach different things. They raise their kids differently. So we already have that. I mean, the the nightmare scenario that we're supposed to enact public schools to avoid is this scenario that we already have. And everybody knows it. Everyone knows the public schools don't serve poor people. When I was in public education, this was openly, it wasn't debated whether that was the case. It was debated why that was the case. Why is it that poor people are not served by this? Why is it that they're not effective? Why is it that it doesn't matter how much money and how many teachers and all this stuff, it doesn't seem to produce anything, right? But while that's not the goal, it only has the tools to wreck that. When I was in school, I felt inferior to people who got better grades than me, and I went to better colleges. But after I've gotten my career, that's gone away. Life is way less stressful. Yeah, and there's used to be. It's not as overt anymore, but there used to be the whole concept of a dunce cap, and you would point out he's a good student, and of course, a good student was a teacher's pet, was somebody who pleased the teacher, and a bad student was somebody who was uppity and ornery and independent, and even if they weren't doing any harm, and even if they weren't actually being aggressive, if they were disrupting the class through their independence, they would get punished and lampooned. And kids who would kowtow, they would be given all kinds of awards and privilege and status. So, and it's very, very hierarchical, right? Who got the better grades? Who's in the AP classes? It's been changed. Who's in the gifted and talented, right? We always have these programs like that, gifted and talented programs. There was in my school there was something called the Math Science Center, and they'd only let a couple kids from each grade. Unspoken, but all but explicit that if a kid went there, they were smarter than everybody else, right? And that was just one example, but there were so many other examples. Who got to be in the top band, and who got to be on the varsity team and not the JV team, and like it's just and to extent. I mean, I'm not against competition, and I'm actually not against meritocracy, but the meritocracy in schools very often is based on pliancy to authorities and not to actual skill or ability. But I will say, I don't think that I ever felt inferior. I felt pretty good. I did well in public school as far as I can tell. Public school should be more of an IQ screening program, fast track the smart kids. I'm gonna have to. I have to read this one. Sorry, Greg. I moved up and I can't see it now. Sorry. Fast track the smart kids to greatness. Fast track the other trades to high. See, the thing I don't like about this is I just don't believe in the tracks. This is what they do this to an extent in Germany. I think that that's not allowing as much autonomy as there should be. People should be much more free than that. We can have five tracks or four tracks or 10 tracks. It's not going to be enough. And I wouldn't trust the government to really make good decisions about that. Because what you have in Germany right now is when you're like in fourth grade, they're basically, hey, you're going on to this, and you'll go to a gymnasium or whatever other type of school. I don't remember all the terms. But and the thing is, they don't have the tools to really to know what people's futures are going to be. So I don't agree with that type of schooling. I just think that there should be no schooling. Minor bullying. I was a military brat. I am gay, so I was never really able to be myself. Everywhere I went, I never belonged. That sounds very sad. I'm sorry that you moved around so much. I think that was probably your main problem there. I was also gay, obviously. I obviously couldn't be myself, but I was pretty good at self-censoring. I'm an 11th grader. We don't really have to attend online classrooms, so it's been really liberating. So what do you do with all your time? Just hang out and watch YouTube videos from anarchists who tell you should quit school? Because I think that's a great way to spend your time. I wish I was homeschooled instead. Many of my homeschooled who eventually came to high school with me were most friendly people I ever met. Yeah. Yeah, the homeschoolers I knew were fine. There was nothing unsocial about them, and their parents usually took great pains to get them quote unquote socialized. So they've had them join Boy Scouts or church groups or whatever, a sports team. Um, and I think that there would still be places for this. I think we would still have like youth sports leagues. They would just not be affiliated with schools. And to be fair, we already have that. Like there's a lot of sports leagues that are not affiliated with schools as it is right now. And they would just be greatly enlarged. The advanced classes were called enriched at my high school. Yeah, it's funny. They don't want to call it the smart kids class or the retard class. So they use euphemisms going on, and we're just using different terms here. So everyone knows special ed. It's just quite a silly kabuki dance, and also the travesty is people can see through it. So nobody is fooled, and so they're also being patronized with obvious lies. Most teachers are female. They spew feminism in public schools. And shame the boys for being boys. They always praise the girls. They also teach acceptance of trans and homosexuality. So I know that they're mostly female. And I definitely had some feminist female teachers, but some of mine were also very old. So like I had a fourth grade teacher who was from Georgia, and she'd started teaching in the 1950s. And even though this was in Michigan, she had a Confederate flag hanging in the classroom, like legit hanging above her desk, like on the wall, displayed. And she would hit students too. Like if you gave her lip, she would smack you. So I guess I'm on the cusp there of like teachers who started in the pre-child rights day, but then I would have newer teachers who definitely fell into that category. And they would say stuff like when I was in eighth grade, we would have like history tests that would be group tests where you'd have team A and team B, and it would be like a Jeopardy quiz, and I was not allowed to take part because my team would automatically win, and that wouldn't be fair. And I was like, well, what's the point? What's the point of like learning it if you're just gonna say, yeah, you don't get to take part? I'm assuming that they're teaching trans and homosexuality much more now, and like, I mean, I'm gay, but I don't think that like I don't see how that fits into the curriculum at all. I went to private school. I didn't pay attention in class and got straight A's. I really wish I could have spent that time doing something else. Yeah, that's the main cost. There's the taxes. There's the administration. There's the pensions and all that, and that's a significant cost. But I think the biggest cost of all is the opportunity cost. It's the lost time of the kids. It's the lost time of the teachers too. Like the teachers could be doing something more productive. They could be doing just about anything else, and they would be being more productive than they are. But obviously, for every teacher, you're looking at 20 or 30 kids, and they would all be much better off if they were doing just about anything else. Working in a factory, playing with their siblings, going to a specialized academy, interning, whatever it is, would be better. My school thought we had a cult because my little group would wear matching lukes. What are lukes? My school is also lots of busy work to keep you from doing something more interesting. XUM, your school, are you in high school or college right now? We had two streams of studies, academic and applied. Academic was a track to university, and applied was glorified daycare for young adults. Yeah, so I don't like the track system because the state is basically picking destinies for somebody, and I don't agree with that. They're also very, and I don't trust them to make that because they have metrics for that I don't necessarily agree with. I don't even care if they're just going off of IQ. Like, I'm not even going to debate whether IQ is good or not. I'm just to say IQ is good. That doesn't tell you everything, and you shouldn't tell somebody, okay, your IQ is this, so you are preordained to do this track and not another. Um, I just don't agree with that. Um, and the thing, what's weird about the zeitgeist in America is that will never happen here because the zeitgeist in America, people will defend public schools like they are a career track and that they're enhancing social capital. And if that's what they were, then a track system might make sense. Would probably be a more plausible way to do it. But the rhetoric for public schools in America is it's egalitarianism. We're giving everybody this common. Everyone's got the same experience, which is false. But that's the rhetoric, and so they would never go for something like that. I'm really into Linux and video games. I've been taking time to enjoy those things. I'm really enjoying the more frequent content lately, by the way. Oh, thanks, Automated Osaka. I'm quarantined like everybody else, so whatever. I might as well contribute to my YouTube channel. I mean, otherwise, I would just, if it was normal times, I'd be learning how to choke people out, but I'll do this instead, I guess. So, one thing I heard Kaplan say that was suddenly realization for me: no PEE, art, music, etc. until you're literate. It makes perfect sense to prioritize things that never crossed my mind. Yeah, there's a lot of things that make perfect sense that they don't do. The priorities make sense. Um, is today is today the Waco anniversary? It would be 37 years. It was 93, right? Yeah, there's a lot of obvious things about the curriculum that they have is just so obviously not ideal in any sense, and nor could it ever be. I mean, the big problem here is that the idea that there'd be a single, um, not 20, yeah, 27 years. That's right, 93. Um, that there would be. I just remember because I was 10 at the time. Oh, okay. That there is some universal curriculum that's good for everybody, and that's just false. And even more than that, I don't even think the curriculum that they have is good for anybody. Like, there's probably nobody where the curriculum that currently exists is ideal for everybody. Is today the same day as the Oklahoma City bombing? Yeah, I, you guys, I'm pretty sure that's the 19th. I think that's the 19th, if I'm not mistaken. Um, I think it's April 19th. And Oklahoma City was ostensibly in retaliation for Waco, and it happens on the same day. But there were other things going on. There was an execution of a neo-Nazi that was also happening that day, coincidentally, and there's evidence that it might have been because of that. We don't really know. What's really weird is people will justify what happened in Waco by saying, "Well, look what happened in Oklahoma City." I'm like, no, you can't kill 70 kids because you think in 2 years there'll be a terrorist attack to avenge them. That doesn't make any sense, but people will make that argument. Jeff Jane. Uh, but yeah, it's amazing that they say we have kids who can't read, and we're teaching them art and PE and music and shop and everything else. Um, it would, I mean, but we also know that it's largely a jobs program, that they need to have art teachers, and the whole thing is a special interest where if you can make the argument plausible to a curriculum board at the state level or the community level that, oh no, our kids need to be enriched by finger painting, you can get it set in stone, and then that becomes it, and then that art teacher has a job, and she's going to tell you that she works hard. And I have friends who are art teachers, and they'll tell you, I work real hard and I do all this and blah blah blah. And it's like, does it just doesn't matter. It's just such a huge waste. You're just, your entire salary shouldn't exist. And then they can't actually teach the kids to read. I'm even, the people who are literate, we don't know that they're literate because they went to public school. We don't know that. WizKid, thanks WizKid2000. I'm glad you're enjoying the streams. Basic education should include basic training, especially for the context of the draft. Good, I don't agree with the draft, but if that almost makes more sense in terms of like giving somebody a thing that everyone conforms to, and in terms of like national defense, it does actually make sense to, if everybody in America like had basic rifleman abilities and fighting abilities and soldiering abilities, then we would be that much safer. I think the government doesn't really want that, because then the ability to resist the government would exist, right? There'd be more people who would be dispersed within society who could be a threat. Boston Tea Party writes a lot in his books to basically, he thinks that they're very nervous that they have, because they have this professional army that's demobilizing a couple 100,000 people every year. Those people go back into society, and once they do, their loyalty to the state will diminish to some degree, and so you have this backlog of potential resistance that's spreading back. So you're training people who could be your future opposition, and I think that if they made basic training a fundamental part of school curriculum. Speaking of useless, harmful jobs in government, my smartest colleagues in the econ department went to work at the Federal Reserve. You went to econ? You were in an econ department? I didn't know that. Yeah, you have to be really smart to know how to spend trillions of dollars, right? Not just anybody can do that. Let's just show my shirt. Oops. And one of the points that Luke made, if this much earlier in the stream, if we have sustained economic problems, which I don't think we should, there's no reason they should just let everyone go back to work, and it's like no capital was destroyed, and we should be okay. But they may not do that, so we could look at a situation where we are in like a really bad depression and tax revenues are gone. And so what, are we going to continue to be saddled with all these costs for all these schools? We're going to pay the same as if all the kids are going there when they're not. Like, again, I have friends who are going to school and like they got kicked out, but they already paid for their room and board. Are they getting refunds? Most of them aren't. I think some places will, but most of them aren't. And they have to be like, what? I'm not even, or for my dorm and for my meal plan, which I can't use now. And that's individual students in college, but like people in towns across America are going to have to ask, why are we paying for all this? Why are we keeping the lights on? Why are we keeping the heat on? Why do we have janitors? Why do we have grounds crew who are going out? Like, I remember thinking about that at my school, because when they built the new high school in my town, they acquired a lot of land. They bought several square miles of land, and there were acres and acres of fields, soccer fields, baseball fields, football fields, practice football fields, practice soccer fields, practice. And so they had like a full-time crew whose only job it was to mow, just at the high school, all day, every day. When you have a child, what direction will you go with education? So like my ideal, I have like an anarchist enclave, and we have like a community of anarcho-capitalists, and we all have our kids, and we homeschool and bring in private tutors. That would be my. Accumulated debt is causing deflation. They won't be able to get rid of it except through mass money printing, and they're just doing mass money printing, and people aren't working. So this is exactly like continue to get paid. In that case, they were not working because of a strike. The French occupied the Ruhr, and to get reparations back, and the workers there went on strike. And then when they started to, then you start seeing the purchasing power of the dollar go down. Of course, the first thing that went up is the stock market boomed, so everyone thought that they were getting rich in the stock market. So it's a different scenario because the dollar is the reserve currency and whatnot, but we're starting to get to where it's more and more similar to a hyperinflation scenario. And they would need to start cutting spending, and we just know that they don't have the political will to do that. They have every political incentive to spend, 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 and then they have all the academic cover from not only the Keynesians, but now the MMT people. Oh my God, the MMT people have become so popular and so belligerent in their views, and they're so adamant that they're correct, and they're basically telling the politicians, you can't print too much, and taxes don't matter, revenue deficits don't matter, print baby print, and like they're doing it. So that's what we're gonna have. Something I've always wanted to ask pro drafters if the government can force me to, because the military is patriotic. Fuck yeah. That's what Milton Friedman asked when he was debating General Westmoreland about the draft, and Westmoreland Dances with Wolves. You seen recommend? Yeah, I love Dances with Wolves. So Dances with Wolves is a really interesting movie. It's a great film. Very watchable, especially the first hour and a half. I've been to a lot of those places. Whenever I go out west, I think of the theme music, and you can go to the Badlands in South Dakota, or in western Nebraska, or in eastern Colorado, and it's absolutely epic. And I love going to that part of the country, and I always think about Dances with Wolves when I go. So what's interesting is there's a lot in Dances with Wolves that's great, that is refreshing, right? So we've had the Western for 100 years at that point, almost, or 80 years, and so much of it is this, Custer's Last Stand and the vainglory, nationalism, and all that, and the Indians are these horrible barbarians, and then Dances with Wolves is going too far the other way. But it's interesting because I remember my uncle was like, it's so much, Dances with Wolves is so much bullshit because, the Indians are depicted as so nice and everything. It's not true. Like, the Indians in Dances with Wolves are brutal murderers. And the only problem is that the Sioux are depicted as basically like pacifists, and they just do, not pacifists, but they're self-defensive. And the Pawnee are depicted as like the bad Indians, who go around killing people for no reason. When the Sioux, the Lakota, were actively genociding other tribes, including the Pawnee and the Crow especially. And the fact that they would gloss over that adheres to their race because they're helping the white people, but actually the Sioux had been like literally attempting explicitly to genocide the Pawnee and the Crow and a couple other tribes. That you can hardly blame them. So it tries to be very politically correct. I think that was the intent. It doesn't necessarily come across because, again, when the Lakota first find out that Kevin Costner is at that fort, what's their first instinct? Their first instinct is to go and kill him, to steal his horse and to kill him. And the same thing when the Pawnee come across Timmons, his sales guy. Their first thing is to kill him. So I think it was meant to be this politically correct thing, this swing in the pendulum, and it was. But it's still, I really liked it. I mean, I think it's a great film, but again, and it won Best Picture. It won like 6 or 7 Oscars in 1991. It does come at the end. It kind of takes off a little bit, and it's not really based on anything. Like I don't think there's any stories of like a military officer who went native in that way. People who went native usually were abducted as children, like Sands with a Fist was. But yeah, I love it as a film. It's a beautiful film. It has some of the most interesting pacing at the beginning. I love the cinematography. I love the music by John Barry. It has one of the most iconic scores I think that you'll ever hear. Where they filmed it, the fact that they used Lakota. So the book, It's based on a book. The book was actually by the producer. The producer wanted to make a movie, and somebody who he was working with said, "You haven't fleshed this out enough. Write a novel first." So he wrote a novel, Dances with Wolves. It's interesting. Most of the names are taken from his history. So Kicking Bird, Ten Bears, um, Wind in His Hair. Those are all actual names, but particular incident. But in the book, he has them be Cheyenne. And when they tried to make the movie, there were just not enough Cheyenne speakers for them to do it. So they switched it to Lakota, because there's way more Lakota speakers. Lakota is still spoken in South Dakota and a couple other places. I've met people who could speak it as like a first language. I've met white people who could speak it as a first language. Um, but no, it's a great film. It's just a little bit too. You gotta add that with the the more patriotic stuff, and you kind of get a synthesis that's closer to the truth. But uh, if MMT is correct, why haven't animals like ants used it? If you can have infinite resources by creating useless totems. Yeah, this is my question. If anything that they said was true, why don't we just give everybody millions of dollars every day? Why does anybody work? Why we shouldn't have to work? We should just get money. Apparently, there's no limit. Stream is cutting out like crazy. Anyone else having problems? Don't know what to say. I did the math. Government borrowing essentially levies the same total burden on the populace as direct taxes, but not as heavily on the bondholders, in practice, the banks. Are you talking like Cantillon effects, that sort of thing? Or the fact that they borrow about as much as they tax? Because isn't at this point like their yearly budget expenditures are twice what they're taking in revenue, something like that, correct? And the stream is choppy. Crap. Don't be choppy. Oh, we're getting a math tutorial. Uh-oh. Tortoise Dream. Tortoise Dream. I forgot everything I learned in math class at high school, so I don't know if this is going to work. Oh no. I don't know what to tell you guys. I don't think there's anything I can really do. Maybe. Let's see. Oh, operation is locked. Can't move it. Uh, and if they have to pay interest to the bondholder, so they have to pay more that they'll extract from taxpayers. Girl, get some gigabyte speed internet. Sorry, I haven't gotten my stimulus check yet. I can't do it. So since this is on my phone, I can't really. Uh, Still looking choppy. Great. I don't think this is gonna help. Also made another video about thoughts. Well, I don't know what signaling theory, but like I agree that like affirmative action is almost worthless. As soon as people know, if they were promoting African Americans, let's say, and getting them into Harvard and Yale, but nobody knew that that was why that people just thought that they were getting in on their own. So like if this was clandestine, then people might think, oh, like black people are doing great. They're getting into Harvard. They must be really smart. And nobody had any idea that it was affirmative action. But as soon as people know that's what it is, then they're going to say, well, it doesn't matter that they got it. They just gave it to them, right? So there wasn't an achievement. There's no achievement there. Now, you could argue that just schools in general are like that in the sense that, at one point, getting a college degree or getting a high school diploma was an achievement, and now we know it's not. We know that it's just participation points. They're just handing them out. And as such, what is it even worth, right? We know that everyone gets them. We know that they're just passing everybody. Like the pass rate is ridiculous. If you just show up, you're going to pass. They'll find a way to make it happen. It's not like, the analogy I would think of would be like the Chinese examination system, which was very difficult, and most people, like even at the bottom level, most people didn't pass. So that system had a lot of problems, but you knew if you passed, it was because you got a really good score. Now, what they were testing was bullshit stuff, but at least you knew that. But now, and it's been this way for 50 years, getting a high school diploma, it's like they're handing those out. Those are participation points, and college diplomas also are essentially becoming that way. And there might be there might be majors. This is different. So like getting a certain degree from a difficult major might be this way, but any school you go to will be that way. So when you go to Harvard or Dartmouth, even these are ostensibly harder schools, but they will make sure that you graduate. They will find a way. You might not do the major you want, and I forget her name, but Sam Harris interviewed this woman who she's a leftist, but she had done a lot of work on affirmative action at Harvard, and she was saying that um, they know, like when they have students who are African American students, and they're below Harvard standards, but they're not stupid. They are smart. They are genuinely smart, and they are students who probably local state college. They go to Harvard and they say undergrad degree, and they know that most of these guys, most of these kids, most of these students in but because they will now become a public school teacher, probably with a chip on their shoulder, but not in the way that they might think. It's ironic that the USA is the only nation in the world that has no official language, and Americans are also notoriously monoglot. Is that really true? It's the only nation with no official language. It. All right, guys. So the lag is apparently pretty bad. So let's have a. Should I stop the stream or should I keep going? Let's get some comments, and the comments will let me know that it's even working. I should put a timer how long it takes to get the word out. It's better now. Better as in like reset the router. Tortoise. No, it's going off my phone. Otherwise, I'm gonna watch Dances with Wolves. Have you seen Dances with Wolves? Keep it going, Daddy. Oh no, the daddy stuff, not this. You should join my. I have a Snapchat group just for daddies. Just my daddy group for Snapchat. Oh, best intactivist or circumcision by virtual things so far. Doctors against circumcision is good. Lawyers against circumcision are good. But I think also Your Whole Baby. That's the one that I've attended a little bit. They seem very hardcore about it. So there's then there's Intaction. I don't know that I mean I bought a lot of stuff from Intaction, but I don't know that they're my favorite. Probably Your Whole Baby, Doctors Against, and Doctors Against Circumcision and Lawyers Against Circumcision. Lawyers Against Circumcision is run by a guy named Steven Svoboda. And then I forget who Doctors Against Circumcision is run by, but some really interesting guys. Over to your laptop. Also be the software you're using on the live streams. Yeah, so I was trying to use my normal setup, stream off my phone like this before. So, considering this was the first attempt, it's not bad. I think you mean attorneys for the rights of the child. Is that what they're called? They also have they have in the U.S. say that the doctors would have to come out and say this was wrong and we should not have done this. And the moment they say that, they'll be in a litigation nightmare, and so they will never say that. And so procedure. No, not those daddies. I was being ironic. Oh, okay. Steven Svoboda. I feel like the problem is that all these organizations have hit a wall where laptop was better. Yeah, well, I'm sorry, the laptop was not working today. I tried repeatedly and it just wasn't happening. I don't know why. It was giving me a JavaScript error, which is never done before. Any institutional change on this ground. Yeah, so we need to change people's minds on a one-on-one. In a general sense, I certainly agree with you. In the specifics, I don't know that we agree on everything. The tactics, I think the tactics that people use really vary in their effectiveness. So like the Bloodstained Men, I think that is effective for some people, but not for others. That happens all the time, and there's a dedicated cadre of intactivists who do that. And I just don't know how effective it is. Some people are definitely will change their mind, and other people will double down. And some people will watch that and look, hey, look, intactivists are crazy and they're unreasonable. That's true. Circumcision, protesting circumcision outside public schools. See, I don't. See, that makes sense to me. That's a good idea. When I was with Your Whole Baby, they were talking about going to like college campuses and talking to people there. And I think that should be. I think that like college outreach, especially to women, but also to men, they're more receptive. They'll listen and they'll remember that conversation. Whenever the time comes. So I went to a meeting about this in February, and the plan was to start doing it, and then this COVID-19 and the college campuses are empty now. So activism will only work when circumcision is illegal. When circumcision is illegal, we won't really need activism. Outreach to angry young men of arms-bearing age. I don't know. I feel like, on the one hand, it's psychologically it's harder for men if they're cut. Philosophically, it's easier for women, but I don't know. Not gonna listen. Their paternal prerogatives become. What are your options? Who knows? I'm too colored by what I would, how I would react or how I would want them to react to accurately guess how they will react. So I don't know. Also, it's impossible because you have to also know what's going to happen, and I don't know what's going to happen. Activism. Think of Governor Republican at the end of the day. He's no Mark Sanford, that's her. Or Justin. So, good on him for that. All right, guys. So I'm gonna do maybe 5 more minutes. So if you got final questions, go ahead and shoot them out. Can you buy a new computer? Not with the lack of donation. Total of like $70. It certainly seems like in the international bumper car arena, that's one of the things that could happen. But given that they're nuclear power and we're nuclear power, I don't know, right? We just haven't had great powers fight each other directly, and the reasons why still exist. So I don't know. I think it could, but maybe if they get way more aggressive in the South China Sea or with South Korea or Japan or something, but I just don't see that very likely. All right. See, I don't know if people are just not asking questions or if it's just that the stream is lagging really bad. They're the only, like, when there was basically a schism in the Free State Project when they started it, which I gotta say they're both good choices. I could see it going either way for a couple of reasons. Eventually, New Hampshire won, which makes sense. Or Virginia or Maryland, would you rather move to Wyoming? The metrics that you use, New Hampshire is a better state, but on other metrics, Wyoming's a better state. Um, and as you talk, I've spent years of my life in Wyoming, and I love Wyoming. It's a wonderful state. Um, but Boston Tea Party of Boston's Gun Bible fame, uh, he he really thought Wyoming was better, so he um, started his own Free State Wyoming project, and he moved out there. And there's about 100 people, and then he wrote a novel. He wrote a novelized version of a Wyoming secessionist movement called Molan Labe, which is a really fun novel if you'd like to read one. It's about a military revolt against the U.S. government stemming from Wyoming. So, if you really want to get the goods on a Free State competitive movement, that would be the place to look. They have a website. They're not very active. When I was considering if I should move to Wyoming or New Hampshire, I had gone to PorcFest, and then I posted on one of their websites, and I just said, "Hey, I'm thinking about moving to either place. Give me the pitch." And they were kind of rude. They were just like, "You should decide for yourself. It shouldn't have nothing to do with us or whatever." And I'm like, "Okay, that's not spent many years in Wyoming anyway." Um, my truck is buried there, sadly. There is a liberal version of it or a socialist version of it from an earlier thing. That's how brilliant. That's how Bernie Sanders ended up there. For watching. This was fun. Hopefully, I'll figure out my laptop so we don't have to do it this way again. And I'll talk to you all another day. Good night.